right, welcome back to a special episode of Under Review. Today we have a special guest, Rich Hollenberg, broadcaster of the Tampa Bay Rays, Syracuse alumni as well. I'm Jeremy Goldstein along with Ethan Birch. But first off, Rich, how are you doing today?
I've been better. I was better a couple of days ago when the Rays were up 3-love. Now it's 3-2, so we got a series, but this is what you live for as an athlete and as a broadcaster, these iconic potential moments that could happen. Someone's going to be a hero over the next couple of nights, and it'll be exciting to talk about it.
And as you mentioned, and like we mentioned at the top, you are a broadcaster. You are working for the Tampa Bay Rays currently. We want to get into some of that broadcasting stuff first. So the first question I'm going to ask is, when did your dream of becoming a sports broadcaster originate, and when did that become a reality for you?
That's a great question, Jeremy. For me, it was really, really young. I distinctly remember being 10 years old and my parents deciding for me that I was going to MC my sister's bat mitzvah. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what went into it. All I know, I was going to have a microphone in my hand and I was going to be in front of a big crowd of people for the first time in my life. And obviously, the candle lighting ceremony came and went, and I got some laughs and I saw a lot of smiling faces, and something inside of me clicked in my head that said, I want to do that again. I want to keep doing that. And I was a huge sports fan. And one thing kind of led to the other. I went to summer camp when I was a kid, and one of my boys' head counselors for that camp had really strong ties to Syracuse and was really close with the basketball program. And right down the street from where I went to camp, which was Camp Tawanda in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, was a renowned basketball camp called 5-Star Basketball Camp. And Gary, who is this head counselor I was telling you about, used to bring players and coaches over from that camp to visit our camp based on his relationships with them. So he brought a lot of Syracuse people over. And that's how I fell in love with Syracuse, again, at a very young age, 13, 14 years old. So those two things really kind of combined in my head when I found out all the people, all the legends who came before me, who attended Syracuse, the Marv Alberts, the Bob Costases, the Dick Stocktons, the list goes on and on and on and on, as you guys probably know. I said, you know what? I love sports. I love speaking in front of people. I love Syracuse now. It was a no-brainer for me to go that path and pursue my dreams at Newhouse School. And I guess it worked out for me in the long run.
That's really cool. So you talk about how you love sports. Do you have like a specific favorite sport that you really wanted to get into? Did you maybe play that sport growing up in high school?
Yeah, I played a lot of basketball and a lot of tennis. I played baseball also growing up, but once I reached high school, I had to choose tennis or baseball because they were played at the same time. And I ended up choosing tennis. So basketball was always my first love. I loved playing all sports. And then I realized that, the most important thing for me above anything else was actually being at that sport. When I graduated college, like a lot of people my age, I graduated in the early 90s. And that's when Sports Center itself was the king of everything. I mean, it was watching it every night. There were, they were breaking new ground seemingly every time they went on the air. And I thought the top of the mountain for me as a sportscaster was to be a Sports Center anchor. So I never had a design on calling games live or being at the events live. But I always, in the back of my mind, I said, wow, how did these guys get to watch all these games in person? They're in a studio in Bristol, Connecticut. I never made that connection until I realized that my dream was not necessarily to be an anchor in a studio. It was more to be doing something sportscasting wise, but be at the events. And very fortunately now, I always tell people who I speak with, your age or aspiring sportscasters or whatever the case may be, that I get to flex all the muscles that I learned at Syracuse. I am a pre and post game host. I call college basketball games for ESPN. And for a long time, I was a reporter for the NFL Network. And those are the three things that I was trained to do. And fortunately for me, I was able to do all of them at some time.
Going back to your Syracuse days, we did some research. We found that there are also some very prestigious broadcasters that came out of Syracuse. Obviously, Newhouse is a prestigious program. Do you ever have any connections with the Iron Eagles and Mike Tiricos of those days?
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone knows everyone, and we call it the Newhouse Mafia. And no joke, guys, my first job in television and my second job in television were strictly I got those jobs strictly because of that Newhouse Mafia. I
Wow.
kept in touch with one of my professors when I graduated college, and he called me one day. I was living in New York City. I was working for the Associated Press, and he called me. He said, "You still want to be in TV, right?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "Well, we have a reporter who you graduated with in Great Falls, Montana at KFBB TV, and he just called me and told me they're looking for a sports guy. Are you interested?" And one of the biggest things I tell everybody who wants to get into this business is just say yes. Don't think about the fact that, oh, it's in Montana and that sounds like it's, a shitty place to live, or no one lives in Montana. Why would I want to go out there? Or, oh, they're offering you how much to take that job? That's nothing. How do you live on that little money? Just say yes. Get your reps in front of your camera as much as you can wherever it is. Make your mistakes when no one's watching. That's another way of putting it. And so that was my first job because of Professor Bob Lissett, who I kept in touch with at Syracuse. I got a job at KFBB TV in Great Falls, Montana. 6 months later, I got another call from Syracuse saying there's a job in the Tampa Bay area for the sports director of a local cable channel. Are you interested? Just like I did 6 months prior, I said yes, sight unseen, flew down to Clearwater, Florida, interviewed for the job and got it, and came to find out that the 5 people prior to me who had that job all graduated from Syracuse.
Wow.
It was literally like a heritage job from Syracuse University. And ironically, as an aside, Todd Callis was one of those guys. Todd became a great friend of mine, is now the play-by-play man for the Houston Astros, and had my job with the Rays before he left for his job at the Astros. So, the ties to Syracuse have always been strong and they remain deep. I'm very blessed and fortunate to know certain people who are like a who's who. Sean McDonough, Dave Pash. These are guys that I now call my friends as well as my contemporaries. And it still blows my mind that I'm able to say that.
That's really insane how much Syracuse affected your career and all these other broadcasters. It seems like going to this school really just set you off. And as soon as you graduated, they put you in great hands. It seems like they treat their alumni extremely well. So moving on, you say you got a job at a college because of Syracuse. You moved on to work with the New Jersey Nets, correct?
Yes, that was my first media job out of college. It wasn't on TV. It wasn't even on the radio. It was for a company called Sports Phone. And it doesn't exist anymore because of the internet, basically. But if you lived in the greater New York area, you knew Sports Phone if you were my age or older. The jingle on TV commercials were, for all your sports news instantly, dial 976-1313. And it was basically people who were either gambling or had some reason to keep tabs on games all the time. And every 10 minutes, myself and a half dozen other guys would go into these phone booths in our offices outside of a bank of walls, which had every sporting event going on at the time functioning. And we would literally just read off a list of scores, updating them every 10 minutes. From that job, they put me in charge of covering the New York Nets, which was quote unquote premium coverage for Sports Phone. And I got to go to games covering the Nets that season. And I basically was, I don't know if you guys know what a stringer is, but in radio parlance, a stringer is someone who, for sports radio stations, calls in updates. It would be like on WFAN, they would say, let's go to Rich Hollenberg with an update on the Nets game. And I would do my, 30-second update. And then after the game, I would get interviews and add that to a report I put together after every game. So it was like TV and radio, but it just wasn't on TV and radio. But covering the Nets was my first job, really involved with professional sports.
And now the last thing we want to ask you about this whole big broadcasting development career you've had. You said you mentioned you worked with NFL Network, and it seems like you got to cover that Aaron Hernandez story when it was really in its prime in the news, when it was really a big deal. What was that like for you, considering this is such a groundbreaking scenario for the New England Patriots in the NFL?
Yeah, it was surreal. That word is sometimes overused, but it really was. I was a sports guy, and I was, I had no experience covering news other than that first job out of college when I moved to New York City and worked for the Associated Press, the New York bureau at the Associated Press. Um, and even then, I was an editorial assistant. I wasn't covering hard news, but I remember distinctly I was leaving Falcons camp and got a call from my assignment editor saying, do me a favor, instead of flying home, just hop on a flight up to Boston. Something's going on with Aaron Hernandez. We have no idea what it is, but we feel like we need some boots on the ground just to make sure that we cover it. So I said, sure. I changed my flight. I flew up to New England, and fast forward 10 days later, I was camped out in front of Aaron Hernandez's house for 10 days, speaking to FBI agents and potential witnesses. Wow. And I mean, things that I never dreamed that would ever happen to me in my career for any reason, let alone a murder. I was right alongside Good Morning America to one side of me and CNN to another side of me. And we happened to be the first people to go live on national television when Aaron Hernandez actually physically got arrested, walked out of his house in handcuffs, and was taken off to his arraignment. So it was crazy. I remember being there every day wondering, how much longer am I going to be here? This just doesn't make sense to me anymore. And it was eerie. It was sad. Obviously, there were lives lost. But then in the aftermath of that, I got to go home for a couple of weeks. And then in the future had to follow up going back to the court cases when he first was taken to court and the hearing started. Listen, it was a tragic, sad moment in the lives of many people for the NFL and for the New England Patriots, of course. But it's something where, in sports parlance, you love being a witness to history, just like in the Major League Baseball playoffs that we're in the throes of right now. I know somewhere or another, I'm going to be a witness to history. It was the same thing back then with Aaron Hernandez, but for albeit very different reasons.
That is just a crazy story how you just got walked out and they told you to fly over to Boston, because I looked up and I saw you were on that. And I just think that was a crazy thing to talk about, because it was one of the biggest murder cases in sports history, and at least in me and Jeremy's generation, that we can
O.J. Simpson.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, it was. And we were talking about that. One of my things, and it sounds like I'm name dropping and I don't want to keep going back to Syracuse, but first of all, two things. One of the things I remember was meeting Bob Costas for the first time and hearing him speak to an audience of people, of which I was part of, and him telling us one of his jobs that he feels is the most important aspect of his job, especially in bigger moments, is giving that instant perspective of what we're witnessing. Not just documenting the event, which every good reporter should be able to do, but also give a little bit more of a treetops view of what we're seeing here. Put it in more bigger perspective, a more global perspective. And I've always kept that in mind. I'm a research hound. I'm a history buff. So it's not only incumbent upon me to do that for my job, but it's also fun for me to do that as well. And that leads to the second point that I wanted to make sure I touched on when it came to covering Aaron Hernandez. Once again, it doesn't, I sound like I'm a walking advertisement for Syracuse and Newhouse School, but they didn't teach me how to be a sportscaster. They taught me how to be a journalist. So I knew deep down, even though I hadn't done it before in the years that I had been out of school, I knew I had the skills to cover an event, right? Document the facts, report the truth, get both sides, all the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of being a good reporter. I learned at Newhouse School. Hadn't had a chance to use those skills per se in the real world, but that was the first time with that moment in time where I was able to fall back on what I learned, as a college student, and it served me very well.
That's a point that a lot of sports broadcasters, anyone who listening, including me and Jeremy, should take note on, knowing how to do everything, because that's a crucial point. They put you on an assignment, and as long as you know how to do everything, you'll be fine. Whether it's journalism, it's not only talking in front of a mic, sports broadcasting, it's so much more on 10 different levels of
Yeah.
the entire sports game. So I want to talk about, we talked about obviously a tragedy in the Aaron Hernandez case, but you also were able to cover some phenomenal sporting events, including 8 Super Bowls, providing on-field coverage and commentary. But a moment that I also want to kind of touch on, is when you broadcasted the Wichita State's final undefeated season game. Can you talk about that experience, or was that your favorite experience? Was there another experience you want to talk about?
Wow. I've been asked that question a lot, and it's framed differently from a lot of different perspectives, but that was certainly one of, if not the most memorable moment that I've had in my decade plus calling games for ESPN. I got to know that team really well, which doesn't happen very often in our sport. And, you're flying from one campus to the next, covering one team to the next. Usually you end up covering 1 or 2 conferences, so you get to know the teams a little bit. But in that respect, I was covering the Missouri Valley Conference. That's the conference they were in at the time. And I was still on the come up with ESPN. So that was my biggest assignment to date. It just so happens that Wichita State was far and away the best team in that league. So every Saturday I was in Wichita, or I was with Wichita, wherever they were playing. So I got to know that team really, really well. And I, in a sense, grew up in college basketball play-by-play with Fred VanVleet as a point guard, as a freshman,
Wow.
and with Ron Baker, who later went on to play for the Knicks,
Knicks
and
legend, yeah.
all those teammates. Cleanthony Early was on those early teams. He played for the Knicks
Another Knick,
as
yeah.
well. These are kids that felt like friends to me more than anything else. And I could say that now. When I covered them, I certainly didn't treat them that way, but they were a joy to watch because they played hungry. They played the right way. They played with a chip on their shoulder. None of these kids who were going to Wichita State at the time had any kind of high school basketball pedigree. These were all grinders who were just hoping for a shot at continuing their career. And I know there's a lot of bad press right now surrounding Wichita State and Greg Marshall, but all I can tell you is from my experience covering that team, I would send my son to Wichita State to be coached by Greg Marshall because I loved how he gave the tough love. He was not he was not an easy man to play for, but he coached you hard and he loved you hard. He gave you a kick in the ass when you needed it, and that was probably more often than not, but he also knew when to give you a hug, when to pull you aside and put an arm around the shoulder. So it was just a joy to be part of that. And then to have it finish with a run to the Final Four, followed by an undefeated season, and to be with those guys at the last game in Koch Arena, which is one of my all-time favorite places to call a basketball game. It was special. And I can't say it was the most special moment, but if you put me on the spot, it would be number 1 or 2, because there was a lot that kind of coalesced to make it as magical as that particular moment was.
That's incredible. That really is. So you talk about these insane events you did. Me and Jeremy also got to cover Division III basketball tournament last year before the COVID got turned off, because we go to Ithaca College, so down the road from Syracuse, and the women's hosted the first 2 rounds. So we were able to stay back during our spring break and cover it. That was our final days before COVID really hit and sent us home for good. But you played, how can you talk about stress? Did you ever have stress going into these big events maybe? And how did you handle it for our younger broadcasters listening, people that maybe get the jitterbug going into a big national tournament game?
Well, you should. That's part of, if you're not nervous, that means you don't care enough. And we all care, right? You care, Jeremy cares, everyone, pardon the French. If you don't give a shit, why are you doing it in the first place? I get nervous before every broadcast I do, whether it's covering the Rays before and after the games, whether it's calling Rays games, which I've done in the past, filling in for our play-by-play guy, or doing college basketball games, or in the past working for NFL Network and whatever other jobs I've had. It's similar to being an actor. I've heard a lot of acting coaches and actors talk about the fact that there are no small roles. There are only small actors. I feel the same way about our industry. You know, calling Missouri Valley Conference games, if I'm doing an Illinois State at Missouri State game, how many people really on the national stage really care about that game? Well, I know a bunch of people at Illinois State who care, and I know a bunch of people at Missouri State who care. So that's who you're calling for. That's who you're talking to. And at the end of the day, those butterflies are what drive you to give your best performance. And if you've done the homework and the research and the training and the preparation beforehand, then you let it ride on that. And you can sit back and enjoy the game and enjoy the telecast and enjoy your partner who you're sitting next to. And that comes through on TV. If you're nervous and all you're thinking about is, I don't want to screw up, I'm so nervous, just take a deep breath. What I like to do, someone once told me this, I wish I could remember who told me this, but believe it or not, I was shooting an infomercial, and somebody told me, because I had a lot of lines to memorize, it was almost like being an actor, and I had never done that before. And they said to me, one thing I always do before I have, a lot of lines to memorize and say in front of a camera is think of something funny, or at least something that makes you smile, completely outside of what you're doing right now. So we're all fortunate enough in this day and age, guys, we have our cell phones with us, right? So what I've done, and I still do it on certain few occasions, is I have a picture of my family, of my 3 kids and my wife. And it's kind of a silly, funny picture, a candid moment. And I'll always look at one or of those types of pictures, maybe 30 seconds or so before I go on the air. It might not make me laugh out loud right then in that moment, but in my mind, it makes me smile and it makes my heart happy. And if for that one moment, it takes your mind off, oh my God, I'm in front of 20,000 people about to call a Big 12 college basketball game, it helps kind of ground you and focus you and make you realize on some maybe subconscious level that this is just a game that we're covering. It's not, World War III, and it's not anything that is going to be life or death. This is a game. And when it's over, everyone's going to move on, and you will too. So it's not, life or death, and just enjoy yourself. So that's a little bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but I think the crux of it all is, if you know in your heart that you can fall back on all the work that you've done to get to that point, specifically and more broader, then you'll be fine. And everyone watching will be fine as well.
That's really remarkable, the way that you really stated that, because you feel like the players really get a lot of more of those jitterbugs. You don't really think of the announcers, but you do get that. And the fact that you get that every time shows that everyone's human and you're human too. And that's a cool statement for a lot of people that want to be sports broadcasters listening to this.
Thanks. We're all in this together, right? We're all part of a bigger family, and we all have the same neuroses and anxiety about everything that we go through. And that's why networking is so important, because you build relationships with people who either their opinions you trust, their judgments you trust, so on and so forth, that, if you ever need an ear to bend or a soundboard to have, listen to your worries or concerns, or maybe look at a demo reel or something like that, you can reach out to people, and they've been in your shoes certainly many, many times before.
Of course.
And that answer to your that last question actually reminded me of something that was special to me, because for the past 2 summers, not this past one, but the 2 before, I participated in the Bruce Beck Sports Broadcasting Camp, where
Awesome.
we bring in a bunch of prodigy sports broadcasters, have them listen to guest speakers, get some mock reps in there. And one of his guys who ran the veteran camp, there was a rookie camp and a veteran camp, I did both. The guy who run the veteran camp, his name's Mike Quick. He does a lot of high school football stuff right now.
Sure.
But his big thing was, if you're not nervous, your passion isn't there. And that means you're a can't person and you shouldn't be doing this. The people who are nervous are the ones who are going to put the effort in and do all the work to make the broadcast as effective as it can be. And so I thought that hit home, because I've been told that before. So it adds clarity to that statement, because it makes me understand that it truly is important to be nervous. If you go in and you're not nervous, you don't care. So
Yeah, and there's a way to, you're putting a term on that feeling of you're nervous. Nervous has kind of a negative connotation, right? But nervous also means excited.
Absolutely.
You're anxious, right? You can't wait to get going. So there's a way of looking at that where it's not necessarily a negative. And I agree with Mike. And I don't know Bruce, but I grew up watching Bruce on NBC and MSG Network, and I interned at MSG Network when I was at Syracuse for one summer, which was awesome. So that makes me smile to hear that you went to Bruce Beck's sportscasting camp. I did the same type of thing at a Syracuse sportscasting camp the summer of my freshman year and learned so much about sportscasting within a 7-day framework, maybe more than I learned at any sportscasting class that I ever took. After that, it was great.
So now I think we're going to transition into some Rays questions. Obviously, you mentioned at the top of the show, you're not doing as well because the Rays, they've fallen the last 2 games to the Houston Astros. The Astros have made this a series again. And I wanted to ask you from an analyst perspective, do you think the pressure in this series has shifted back to Tampa Bay considering, look, Houston's got their ace on the mound in Framber Valdez, and if they win, they have Lance McCullers, who's been as dominant as they could ask for in Game 7.
Yeah, it's not an ideal situation, but the thing that we fall back on when we talk about the Rays is this is what they're built for. This is why at the beginning of this season, before COVID hit, everyone was saying, look out for the Rays, they're a contender. Mm-hmm. And then when COVID hit and we realized that the season was going to be 60 games and the playoffs were going to be a different format, everyone said, now the Rays have an even better chance of going to the World Series. Why? Because they're the deepest team in baseball and they're the most versatile team in baseball. And those are 2 really, really strong attributes to have when you're dealing with all these unknowns. They had the best record in the major leagues for 1-run games and 2-run games. They're built to play close games. They're never going to, not never, but they're most frequently not going to blow teams out. They don't have that type of offense. So I think the pressure is on both teams, to be honest with you. And that's just like what we talked about a moment ago, being nervous. There's always going to be pressure. It's what you do with that pressure. It's how you treat that pressure. You hear Kevin Cash and even Dusty Baker, who's been around forever, you hear them talk about it. It's if you don't want to be in this moment, like this is the moment we live for. You want to be in this moment. Sure, the Rays would have loved to have swept the series or won it 3-1, but now it's 3-2. When you remember watching games or going to games as a kid, you don't remember like, oh, I remember the Rays swept that series. You're like, oh my God, Kirk Gibson's home run in 1988 in Game 1 of the World Series. Like those are the pressure cooker events that as an athlete, you live for. I always joke, I connect, no matter how good I was at sports, I don't think I would have ever succeeded at the next level because I don't think I could be mentally strong enough to handle this pressure. These guys are. They're built for this. And I think the Rays are still in the driver's seat. They have Blake Snell going against Framber Valdez. Now they have familiarity with Framber Valdez, which they didn't the first time out. So I expect the Rays to win tonight. If they don't, then it goes to Game 7, and then it's anybody's bet. It really is. All bets are off. It's not who's going to handle the pressure better. It's who executes 1 or 2 plays better, just like we saw in Game 5. Nick Anderson, maybe the best closer in baseball. Carlos Correa, one of the clutchest hitters in the playoffs. And tip your cap, Carlos Correa got him on a high fastball, and Nick Anderson said as much in the postgame. You can't overanalyze the situation. I made a pitch, he swung and hit it, game over, tip your cap. That's what Game 7s are all about. And hopefully for Rays fans, they don't have to get to a Game 7, but we'll see in the next couple of days.
Without a doubt. So, you go, Jeremy, go.
All right, thank you. It seems like the identity of the Astros is we're going to feed off every team's hate. And it seems like what the Rays' identity is we're going to just, we have a situation ready for every game. We know how we're going to attack. We're always going to be ready. You saw in Game 5 against the Yankees, they've pitched Glasnow on 2 days rest. And as a Yankee fan, that shocked me. I sort of expected them to maybe go with Glasnow, but not for that 2-inning set. And then they go to Anderson instead of in the 3rd inning. They always have something that's going to blow you out of the water that makes them unique.
Yeah. And I will tell you from one of the cool things about covering a team instead of a sport like I do in baseball is you learn how myopic a view you can have as a sports fan. I grew up a Yankees fan. I grew up in New Jersey, just a stone's throw from Yankee Stadium. And I know Game 5 of that ALDS last week, just like last night's game with Houston fans, every Yankee fan is a pessimist. I don't think there was any Yankee fan going in going,
I was.
"Oh, Game 5, we got this game.
I definitely was.
Well, then you are a much more loyal fan than I ever was.
No, I definitely was a pessimist.
Jeremy
That's what I'm
is-
saying.
Oh, you were a pessimist.
Yeah.
So you're right. You're always thinking like, oh my gosh, where as Rays fans are looking at going, oh my gosh, now we got Judge and Stanton and Gleyber Torres, and God knows they might bring Gary Sanchez off the bench and he can hit the ball a mile. Like, there's no way we're going to win this game. That's the beauty of sports. That's the beauty of being a fan. And then when your team performs, it makes that exhilaration even greater. So, it's hard to kind of take that step back and understand that Astros fans right now are probably thinking the same types of things that Rays fans are thinking. Like, oh man, they're not thinking we won the last 2 games, we got this. They're thinking, oh man, we won the last 2 games. Can you imagine now? We got all this momentum, and now we're going to blow it in Game 6, or the Rays are the number 1 seed. Like, our luck's got to run out at some point. So there's always that pessimism that creeps in. You just can't help it when you're a fan. They call them fans for a reason, right? It's short for fanatics. And when you're a fanatic about something, you don't always use the most logical and rational line of thought.
Oh, absolutely. And let me tell you, that is just the beauty of baseball. Let me tell you, that is just the beauty of baseball, Rich. So let's stick around this Astros and Rays series because there's so much going on. And I want to talk about your thoughts on Kevin Cash, how he manages the bullpen, because in some games, it seems like there's no pattern with this bullpen. And that's what has made this Rays so good. Sometimes Nick Anderson will come in the 3rd inning. Sometimes he'll come in the 7th. Sometimes he'll come in the 9th. They use Diego Castillo very like that as well. What can you say? Is that what potentially has gotten the Rays to where they are today because of how good and situational Kevin Cash has been?
Yeah, situational is a good word, Ethan. But the one thing I will say in response to the way you described it is they bank outs. They treat the first out of the game as valuable as the 27th out.
That's what you got to do.
And that's why you see Nick Anderson, who, performance-wise has been the best closer, not only on the team, but in baseball. You see Nick Anderson maybe coming in the 6th inning. He wouldn't come in the 3rd inning in a regular season game. Trust me on that.
Oh, no way.
But in a game with as much value on it as a playoff game, you look at the other team's lineup and who's coming up. Well, their 1, 2, 3 is up next. Well, if their 1, 2, 3 is up now, don't you want your best closer going in to get those 3 guys?
Yeah.
So that's why Nick Anderson would come in. It's all about leverage. If it's the highest leverage because of who they're putting up in their batting order, then that's when Nick Anderson comes in. And every team has, what they call their A bullpen. The Rays just have a deeper bullpen than anybody else. So their A bullpen might literally or technically be Pete Fairbanks, Diego Castillo, Nick Anderson, and you could use those guys interchangeably. They have a B bullpen who could either hop into the A bullpen or just sit there and be the longest and deepest B bullpen in Major League Baseball. Both teams are carrying 14 relievers, but I think even Dusty Baker would admit to you that the arms the Rays have are much better than the arms that the Houston Astros have. As a matter of fact, he basically admitted that in his post game last night when I was communicating with Todd Callis, who we mentioned earlier, and I was saying to you, I asked him, do you quickly know what the Astros record is this season in extra inning games? Because the Rays were 4-3. I couldn't find right off the bat, like I was literally getting ready to go on the air, what the Astros record was. Todd told me it was 2-7. And he said, and if this game goes extras, forget about it. You guys are going to the World Series because we only have 2 other guys in our bullpen and they're not very good. So that's advantage Tampa Bay. And that's against any team, let alone in the American League Championship Series. So that's how Kevin Cash gets it. And I think Kevin Cash is the best manager in baseball because of the way he manages the bullpen. There are a myriad other things that he does really well, but the way that he not only collectively handles the bullpen, but collectively it elicits information from Kyle Snyder as pitching coach, Stan Borowski as bullpen coach, all the people that he's assembled, part of that, for lack of a better term, the brain trust with the Rays. It's really a collective effort with the coaching staff and with the players. It doesn't matter if you're coming in the ninth. It doesn't matter if you're batting third in the order. You're just here to help the team win. And everyone 1 through 28 has bought into that this year. And that's why they're one win away from the World Series.
And you said it, you couldn't have said it any better. And it seems like not only do they manage the pitching the best, I think they have the best pitching in the playoffs right now, probably. And it starts with their rotation. And you go into this season and Snell is probably your best arm. And then Glasnow's up there with him. So like a two-headed monster. You got Morton, who's coming up at 36, 37 years old, but he's been very good this season and reliable. So you go into game 6. This, as I said before, Snell was is probably your best arm. How confident are you heading into game 6 with Blake Snell on the mound? You're facing a lefty, yet you do have a lot of left-handed batters. You fared well against guys who have thrown the ball from the left side. How confident are you in the Rays with Snell on the mound?
As confident as you can be. It goes back to what we were talking about before, Ethan. I'd be lying if I didn't say I was rooting for the Rays to win. I mean, I don't think anybody wouldn't be shocked at that. So when you put on your fanboy hat, I'm as confident as I could be, I guess. Certainly when you talk about that elusive thing, momentum's on the side of the Houston Astros. They won 2, and the last one they won was in walk-off fashion. And the last 2 games they won were by 1 run, which the Rays never lose 1-run games. They're now 16-7 this season in 1-run games, and the last 2 losses have come by 1 run.
They're also 5 feet away from tying the game on that last shot off the wall. They were just that close. It showed how close this team is every single time. When they lose baseball games in the playoffs, it's barely by any margin, as small as the margin.
Right. And Kevin Cash has said that from day one, before day one, in spring training. He told everybody, we're gonna play a lot of close games. Our job is to win those close games. And that's stuck to the script so far. So you have to think, another thing I learned from Joe Madden, I started working with this team at the end of Joe Madden's tenure with Tampa Bay. And one thing he used to always be fond of saying is, water always finds its level. So you have a hitter who's like Randy Arozarena. He's out of his mind right now. You can't logically expect Randy Arozarena to continue hitting at a 400 clip the way he's been in the playoffs. Water will always find its level. The same thing about someone who's not performing well. Brandon Lau was the team's MVP. He was their best hitter all year. He's been miserable this postseason.
Yeah,
you can't expect Brandon Lau to stay that way throughout the postseason. So where's that level? If you get to level, who has the better advantage? And I would say, as unbiasedly as I can, I would say Tampa Bay has the
Most
advantage.
people would as well.
So if that's the information that I'm using to determine, am I confident or unconfident? I'm confident going into tonight with Blake Snell.
Yeah, and I was going to bring up, you mentioned the A and B bullpen. All of this that we've talked about with the Rays, it just shows how elite Kevin Cash is. The A and B bullpen. When the Yankees were winning in Game 4, I was thinking, all right, the Rays are going to need to get out to this close game with their bullpen. But instead, they used guys like Aaron Slegers and Shane McClanahan, who hadn't pitched in the regular season at all, and they got productive out. And that just set up the entire prime bullpen to be available for Game 5. And they were also able to produce 5+ runs a game most of the time with Randy Arozarena, who, again, he was not above that. He wasn't really this good at all during the regular season. And with Brandon Lau on the slump trail. And also, they got production from Austin Meadows, who had been injured for a long time. And his bat's sort of starting to heat up a bit. So it's clear and obvious that Kevin Cash really knows where to plug which pieces where. And it's resulted in a lot of wins. Yeah,
that's the fun thing about watching baseball games unfold and knowing a little bit more about Kevin Cash and the team than maybe some other people who don't cover the team do, because, baseball has quickly become very much an analytically driven sport, but there's still room for using your gut and managing with your gut. And Dusty Baker does it still because he's one of the old guard, but Kevin Cash still has a little bit of that in him and doesn't get enough credit for that. So plugging Randy Arozarena in, who, I understand your take on a Rosarena, but he just didn't get a chance to play in this regular season. He was dealing with COVID and obviously had very few major league at bats after they traded for him in St. Louis. So they were waiting. Coming into the season, they knew Randy Rosarena was going to play a part in this team. They just didn't know how much. Once they got him up and he started hitting, he just never stopped. So Cash would have been an idiot to put him on the bench. So now he's all of a sudden cemented in the number 2 or 3 spot in the lineup. But I remember talking to Kevin, before the season started and even during the shutdown and when the team started playing the 60-game season, we would ask him, like, who could be coming up from the alternate training site? And he kept saying, all I keep hearing is Randy Rosarena is hitting the ball all over the yard. And lo and behold, here we are 2-3 months later, and Randy Rosarena is hitting the ball all over the yard. So it's great when things play out the way that you hope they will and not necessarily as you expect they will. You got to expect the unexpected, especially in postseason baseball.
100%. You talked about Randy Rosarena having coronavirus, and it took him out, actually, I'm sure you know about this, 4 weeks, and he just kept on repeatedly testing positive, was never able to really get back, so he missed pretty much the whole season. He said that in his hotel room, he had nothing to do, and the only thing he knew how to make was chicken and rice, so he ate chicken and rice all day and did like 300 push-ups a day. And now he comes back and he's raking. And it's really awesome to see. Just wanted to say that. But I just have one more thing before we move on to a little bit of college basketball, and then we'll wrap up this interview. What Kevin Cash is doing, it kind of reminds me, you can disagree or agree with me. I'm kind of curious what you have to say about this. It kind of reminds me of what Alex Cora did in 2018 with the Red Sox. He just knew his team so well. And not only did he go with the statistical view, he did with his gut. He knew exactly when to use Nathan Eovaldi in some moments. It felt like his lineup was just complete with not necessarily guys that were the best hitters in the league. It just seemed like they were perfect in the 7 hole. They were perfect in the 9 hole. And can you compare Alex Cora's performance to what something Kevin Cash might be doing right now?
I can, when you look at it from maybe an analytical standpoint, I don't think there's any team still who is probably more analytically reliant than the Tampa Bay Rays. I mean, they literally have a coach in their dugout wearing a baseball uniform who is an analytics guy, Jonathan Ehrlichman. They call him J Money. And he is a very visible part of that coaching staff. What I will say, not necessarily disagreeing with you, Ethan, is the difference in those teams' budgets. And that is a glaring and maybe too often referred to point is, how do the Rays win where they have the lowest payroll in all of baseball? Well, listen, it's true. I mean, it is a wonder what they're able to do. So you go back to the scouting department, right? You go back to the front office being able to pull off trades. There haven't been many teams like this Rays team who have the number 1 farm system in baseball and are on the verge of going to the World Series. I think there might be 4 teams in baseball history since they've been ranking farm systems that can stake that claim. And the Rays are 1 win away from doing that. Why? Because they draft better than most everybody and they trade better than most everybody. Eric Neander and everybody in the front office for the Rays does a phenomenal job of getting the most value out of every deal they have than just about anybody in baseball. That's why everyone's picking off players and people from the Rays organization. James Click is the general manager for the Astros. He worked for the Rays. Chaim Bloom, the guy who's running baseball ops for Boston, he was in the front office for the Tampa Bay Rays. The list goes on and on and on. They have set the model now that everybody wants to feed off. And baseball, like most sports, are copycat sports. You succeed, and then everyone looks to you to say, why are they doing it? How could we do it that way?
Asking to the why, going back to the why and how in sports, we're going to transition into some college basketball. Obviously, they intend on the season starting late November, having a full season. There will obviously be travel restrictions. They're going to manipulate the schedule based off of that, but in the most non-biased way possible, because I personally don't necessarily see how, with it all being indoors and all that, can they safely execute a clean college basketball season this year?
I think they can, and I think they will, one way or the other. I might be blindly optimistic when I say this, and I'm knocking wood as I'm saying this, fellas. I hope the worst is over. I really do. That's not to say that it's over, but I hope the worst of it is over. And I think everyone is learning as we're going along. So the NBA set a great example for other sports and other organizations to follow with the bubble and being so successful there. The NHL for their part as well. Baseball had its hurdles that they had to overcome with massive outbreaks on the Marlins and the Cardinals. But guess what? They got through a 60-game schedule, and now we're in the playoffs, and no one's talking about COVID. So all of that leads me to believe that we will have a different yet successful college basketball season. And hopefully, as fans, as you guys watching, it won't be that different in the experience of watching college basketball. I know I'm going to be like so many other ESPN sportscasters before me during college football season and during baseball season. I'm going to be calling a bunch of games from my living room, which, makes my head explode. But I've had that type of experience before. ESPN years ago started something that they call REMI broadcasts, remote integration broadcasts. So I wouldn't call out of, let's say I do on average 40 basketball games a year, maybe 10 of those games I was calling from a studio, either in Bristol, Connecticut, or Charlotte where they have studios, or even at Disney where they have a production facility. So I have experience calling a game when I'm not at that game. ESPN is built to handle that type of thing. So on the logistical end, it shouldn't be an issue. I just hope that, again, everyone stays as safe as they can stay. And I think everybody's main goal in college basketball is let there be enough basketball inventory so that we can have a legitimate March Madness tournament. And if that is the result, then it will be deemed a successful 2020-21 basketball campaign, albeit different, but still successful.
Before we wrap up, I just want to ask one more thing about college basketball. There was talks about potentially the March Madness bracket bubbling up in Orlando and playing all the tournament games down in Florida. Is that something possible that they can pull off with 64 teams? Or is that just something that, in your eyes, is that something that they potentially can pull off?
The guys making those decisions are a lot smarter than me. If they can pull it off, they will. There were what, 30 plus teams in Orlando for the NBA. So you're talking about doubling that. Does double that mean it's impossible? I don't have the answer to that. If you're asking me right now, just as a fan, could I see that happening? Probably not. But I think the NHL had two different sites, right? They had Toronto and Edmonton, and then they got together, for the end result. So maybe that's something that happens. Orlando certainly isn't the only safe spot where you can execute a basketball bubble. There are others, and I'm sure others will come up. If you look at what's going to happen in November to December before the conference schedule starts, there are going to be a bunch of bubbles popping up all over the place with 18 tournaments, and maybe it's more of a round robin type thing. Again, inventory is going to be an important thing. How are teams going to get 30 plus games under their belt going into postseason play? That's a big, carrot dangling at the end of the proverbial stick for all of these athletic directors around the country.
And we have a fun question I want to ask you before we wrap this up. I saw that you might have been on SportsCenter's top 10 with a nice little half-court shot. How is that? how is that experience like? And how many tries did that take you? Be honest with me.
That was a long, long time ago. That was before I was at Middle Tennessee State in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. We got there the night before. The game was the next day, Saturday morning. And that was a shot that I had learned from a basketball coach years ago. He's like, if you're ever doing half-court shots, believe it or not, it's easier to take that half-court shot from behind because you get more velocity and more momentum going like that than you do like this. Now, obviously, you've seen like NBA players and even college players are making half-court shots like with 20 seconds left on the shot clock now. Yeah. The game has changed thanks to Steph Curry and company. But I took that shot, and I'm not going to lie, I can't remember. It might have been the first time I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and guarantee you it was the first time. But if it wasn't the first time, it was definitely the second time. It didn't take me multiple times to do it because the cameras were rolling without me knowing it. I didn't say, hey guys, let's record this. The cameras were just testing out their camera facilities to make sure that they were set because we had an early morning game the day after that. That's the only reason I was on the court that night, is because we had just finished up practice. Usually on a regular Saturday, you go to shoot around in the morning, you talk to the players and the coaches, and then the game is either later that afternoon or night. In this case, it was a Saturday morning game, so the teams practiced Friday night. That's the only reason I was in the gym all by myself, and the cameras were what they call in the business faxing out. The cameras were getting themselves ready, making sure everything was functioning properly and so on and so forth. I didn't even know they rolled on that until I made it, and they told me, and then they sent it into SportsCenter. So it was a fortuitous moment for me for sure.
That is funny. So right before we end, I just have one fun question myself. I've heard that you've run in 2 New York City marathons and you're really into skydiving. Is that something? Because that is something that sounds really cool.
Yeah,
Man, the truth is certainly not as interesting as what you're putting out there. I did run 2 marathons. I'm very proud of that. I have not run one since, nor do I have any designs on running another one. I'm 49 years old. And years ago when I ran the second marathon, I was still in my 20s. And I said to myself, I'm done. But maybe as a 50-year-old birthday present to myself, I'll train to just check that box and prove to myself that I can do it again. So now I'm kind of on the clock for that. Thanks for bringing that up. The second thing is, I would not say I'm into skydiving. I skydived, period, once, and that would be it. My parents didn't know about it. They would have killed me had they known beforehand, just like I would kill my kids if they told me they were thinking about going skydiving. So one and done for me when it comes to skydiving.
Well, there we go. Rich, thank you so much for taking the time to allow us to interview, and best of luck throughout the rest of this bubble MLB postseason, and good luck this college basketball season as well.
Guys, it was fun talking to you. Thanks for the time.
Appreciate you a lot. Thank you.
Stay well.